guidelines. And Jim Gilmore has put together a presentation with the finance department to discuss the tax policies. And this is an attempt for the commissioners just to go through what we presently have, and then we'll, at the end, maybe talk about, are there some things you'd like to change? So we'll go through the presentation, and then he's going to take each policy one by one, and then with each policy one by one, you can make comments, or if you want to do some different stuff that you'd like to do. So Jim, you're on.
Good. Thank you, Commissioners. As the Mayor said, we'll go through our current tax policy. I thought go through the entire presentation and then kind of go back and discuss kind of one by one the different policies. So our current tax policies were adopted 2 years ago in 2019, Fargo City Commission meeting. The intent was then to at least keep them in place at least until the next city commission election, and then review them after that. And I think the thinking was, let's try to keep them in place for a series of years so that they're a little bit more predictable. So anyway, and so we're now doing that review after this past election. We have a tax exempt review committee. They review the remodeling exemption or make policy on the remodeling exemption. Our policies talk about the new housing construction exemption. As you see at your virtually every city commission meeting, there's applications for remodeling. We have some set policies that are followed there. The new residential exemption is just done automatically once you've done that resolution. And then the ones that are done individually include anything that's a payment in lieu of taxes or a tax increment financing. The projects that are not administered by the Tax Exempt Review Committee are the Renaissance Zone and community development incentives. Those are administered by the Department of Planning and Development. Members on the committee, the Tax Exempt Review Committee include a Finance Commissioner chairs that committee, includes the mayor, 3 members from the community, have experience in banking, real estate, investment, the city administrator, and the finance director. There are also non-voting members of the committee. Within the Century Code, it calls for us to coordinate with school districts, and so we've had members from both the Fargo and West Fargo school district, as well as recently Cass County with the change in state law that required some consultation with the county commission. Staff members or advisory include myself, the city assessor, the city attorney, and we've also always included the Greater Fargo-Moorhead EDC president or staff. When we think of tax, when I think of these policies and the tax exempt policies, really I think it's a series of policies. And one of the things I'd like to restructure in our policy is, rather than have a TIF policy, a pilot policy, is really what's our policy that relate to each of these goals and objectives that the city has. And so I'm going to go through these because just like your budget, you fund the fire department, the police department, different things. These tax exemption policies really are aimed at different goals and objectives of the city commission. And, just as we have a series of policies on new development, on how we do special assessments, or how we expand infrastructure, or other expenditure policies that relate to new development. Most of these relate more to infill development. So we'll go through these kind of one by one. The legal authority for the different exemptions comes from the legislature. It allows us to provide tax exemptions that affect not only our budget and our tax revenue, but that of other taxing jurisdictions. So there are different sections of the Century Code they're either in the tax code or the municipal code But the bottom line is all of these exemptions mean that the property is not assessed according to the normal circumstances. Either we're providing an exemption that is for a certain period of years and a certain portion of the value, or using TIF revenue to do the same. So they're all tools that sort of have the same effect in providing some incentive for a certain type of development. As far as to give you an idea of the perspective on, the impact on different jurisdictions, this is just an example. If we were to provide a $10 million property tax exemptions, how does that affect the mill levies of the different taxing jurisdictions? And so for the city of Fargo, our mill levy is 53. If that $10 million of property is exempt, that's $25,000 that we would not otherwise receive. See, a little over half of that exemption, the total being $139,000, would be affecting the Fargo School District. The Cass County is similar to Fargo. Fargo Parks is about half of what the city is, and then the other is an assortment of soil conservation districts, the state medical school, a variety of other small mill levies, vector control, some of those things. So we'll first start with low-income housing. You haven't seen that many of these projects, but there are 9 properties right now in Fargo with an exempt value of $35 million. These projects, if they were under the regular tax system, would pay a total of $492,000 a year, and our city share of that would be $88,000. There are other housing projects that are also exempt, including the Fargo Housing Authority and certain nonprofit parcels. Those are exempted either by state law or by the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency. So if it's a nonprofit, they can apply directly to the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency and receive a reduction in property taxes. Sometimes the city provided them with additional reductions. But the bottom line on this is an average apartment unit was probably worth about $100,000, would pay about $1,200 a year in taxes normally, which would be about $100 a month. And in order to provide affordable housing, trying to add that $100 a month either to the tenant's rent or to the developer's costs would make these projects simply wouldn't be feasible if they had to pay taxes, because the city assessor is required to assess them as if there are no rent restrictions, but the rent restrictions certainly reduce the value of the building because your rents are limited. So the second one I'd like to talk about is the remodeling exemption. This is one that the city commission adopted policy that provides for these remodeling exemptions. So if you have a single family home and you spend $50,000 doing remodeling of your kitchen and a new roof and an assortment of other things, the city assessor might come out and otherwise increase the value of your property by, let's say, an average of $25,000 is a typical exemption, what it's worth. And so the city commission at that time didn't want to have people discouraged to fix up their properties for fear of having higher property taxes because of it. And so they actually, originally it was 3 years. We went to the legislature and got it expanded to 5 years, so that in our policy is that if the house is aged 25 years to 40 years, that it's a 3-year exemption. If it's older than 40 years, it's a 5-year exemption. This would include a building addition if someone were to add a bedroom onto the home. Again, it's on the increase, so if your house is valued at $150,000 today and you put $50,000 into it, and rather than having your value increase to $175,000, it stays at that $150,000 for either 3 or 5 years. This includes both residential and commercial properties. Outside of the downtown, commercial properties will generally receive the 3-year exemption. Within the downtown, the 5-year, and this can also include additions. So it's some commercial ones that have been approved over the last year, probably have higher visibility. There's one at 701 University, the old Rosie's Laundromat, that received the remodeling addition, so that that property will stay the same for the next 5 years. Just right across the corner from that, Fargo Brewing also received remodeling exemption, so that property will not increase for 5 years. So that's an incentive to redevelopment in the middle of the city rather than building new on the edge. The new housing exemption, this is an exemption I think came into being in the 1980s when it was hard to finance a single family homes. And so the first $150,000 of a new home can be exempted for a 2-year term. And, cities have the flexibility on this. They could do less and they could have a shorter term. The city of Fargo has stayed with the 150 in the 2-year term when this was changed, I think about 10 years ago. It's an incentive that's also offered by West Fargo, other Cass County communities. In Minnesota, Moorhead has something similar. And so there are 482 properties that are receiving this exemption. The exempt value is 71 million. The total value of the properties is 191 million, so they're paying on that other 120 million in property taxes. You can see what the annual property taxes would be on these, and then the city share of 160,000. So, moving on, we have incentives where we've tried to create jobs, trying to encourage people to expand their businesses or locate businesses in Fargo. The typical exemption has been a 5-year property tax exemption. We've also granted some for 10 years. In most cases, the ones where we've gone beyond 5, it's typically a project that's having or has a high number of jobs, higher wages, or some substantial capital investment, larger value building. Typically, we've required some payment after 5 years, so you may have 100% exempt for 5 years and then 50% for the next 5 years. That's often, or some graduated scale. There've been only a few where we've granted 100% for 10 years at least that are active now. The state law does have a 20-year maximum to the pilot, but our policy has been to try to limit these more to 10 years. The value of the property that's exempt between these two is 103 million, and you can see what the annual property taxes are on these. These job creation projects do not require the but-for test that we have on other developments. Most of these companies are companies that could be in any city, and so the city sort of advertises this as a way to help companies stay here, encourage them to grow here, or encourage them to locate here. Again, we're more focused on the quality of the jobs and the number of the jobs. This seems to be especially valuable for, startup companies or companies that are taking on a new product line. That those first few years, it's often more expensive than your revenue is going to be getting into a new business or an expanded line of work. The city has had a policy that encouraged new housing near NDSU. This was really a policy aimed at two things. One is we were trying to eliminate blighted and rundown structures, and secondly, provide more higher quality housing near NDSU to meet some of the needs of what was, in that time, more increasing enrollment. These projects these programs are fairly similar. They're both aimed, again, at redevelopment of older properties. In these particular ones, we have required this but-for test to see if the developer really needs it, to see if the level of assistance fits with that. Then we're focused more on the redevelopment costs only, not the cost to put up the building, but more costs of demolition, some land acquisition. There's often costs of removing and replacing utilities. We've kind of shifted a little bit over the years. initially we used more of the tax increment financing program and allowed 100% of the property taxes to go back to the developer for up to 15 years. We then kind of shifted away from that into the University of Mixed Use, provided a property tax exemption. It was limited to 10 years with only the first 5 years being exempt. We've in some ways shifted back. The last two projects we've done that have not been in the University Mixed Use zoning district have been the two TIF type projects, one for maximum of 15 years, and then the one adjacent to the Newman Center that's planned for a maximum of 10 years. So,
Jim, can I ask a question here?
sure.
Where is the job creation purpose for pilot? Is that not,
That's, the job creation really is in these economic development policies. So that's it. When we're trying to create jobs, sometimes we could use TIF, sometimes we could use pilot. But the pilot program allows the city to provide property tax exemptions for any business enterprise, whether that's job creation, create low-income housing, or create market housing. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
not really. So on the application, they have to indicate how many jobs they're going to create and what the salary level is.
Yeah.
That is a purpose of the pilot program, is it not?
Not when we're dealing with housing, and often I tell them to use that again, we should have a new application that's focused on housing when we're doing a pilot in that area, because
Okay,
really
I'm
it's not
sorry.
applicable.
Okay.
So,
I missed the title of the slide. Okay, it's just
Yeah.
housing and redevelopment is what you're talking about there. Okay,
so yeah, I think an update of some of our forms, and this will be one of the reasons to kind of put the policy into chapters on these different goals, because we have people trying to create jobs that are saying, why are you asking me about low-income housing? And people that are wanting to do low-income housing and saying, why are you asking me about jobs for? And so I think we need to align the policies with our applications better. Go back to the NDSU area housing. We have 11 of these projects that are currently in place. They 7 under the pilot, 4 under the TIF. Total value exempt is about 20 million, and you can see what's on there. The Roars Newman project is pending and is not included in these figures. We don't have, that one's not completed yet, so we don't know what those values will be. And then downtown redevelopment, we have a whole variety of different tools that we've used to encourage redevelopment in the downtown. There are currently 22 properties that are receiving Renaissance Zone exemptions, 7 pilots, and 1 TIF note. Total value is 130 million. The Renaissance Zone are limited to 5 years. The pilot, we've gone, I think, 10 years on some of the housing projects. Some of the pilot ones were not within the Renaissance Zone boundaries, so we use that program instead. There are some of these are used in conjunction with each other. We've had housing projects where they've had 5 years of Renaissance Zone followed by 5 years of pilot. But this is a snapshot of where all these projects are in the particular program this year. Anytime we've gone beyond 5 years, we required the but-for test to make sure that's justified. The Renaissance Zone, it's not required because that property tax exemption is limited to five years. The downtown redevelopment, this is a question I had recently from the mayor, was that how many properties have we had downtown be in the Renaissance Zone? You can see all those properties highlighted. Those are properties that have qualified for Renaissance Zone incentives. Should note that a property only qualifies once, so that if someone that received a Renaissance Zone 15 years ago and they're doing something additional with their building, they cannot qualify again for the Renaissance Zone. They maybe qualify for remodeling, but the goal of the program is to just redevelop once and be done, not to have someone cycle through a second time.
Jim, do we have a half of a block to still somewhere dedicate to Renaissance?
As far as how many blocks? that we
Yeah,
have.
isn't there a little bit of a room to still designate another area
Yeah, I
after
think
the Oak
there's,
Grove?
I think there's 2 or 3 blocks that we could designate. We've kind of kept those in reserve so that we can add a block without having to take it away from someone else.
And if I might, when that does happen, who initiates that? Is it our approach from the city to decide where's the best use potentially, or is it applicants come to us and then try qualify?
When we've actually created the, updated the plan every 5 years, we've kind of looked at it and staff has suggested, which blocks where we think there's a high level of development. We've also notified everyone in the downtown and told them about it so that, if we're not aware of a project, someone can come to us and say, hey, I could do this project if I was in the Renaissance zone. And then after that, it could be either staff initiated, but more often it's a developer or property owner would come to the city and say, I want to do this project. An example was the Radisson renovation where they came to the city and said, please add this block, next time you update. And we did that. So after the plan set, it tends to be more property owner driven.
And Jim, there's one satellite where you can have, so the Oak Grove project is considered the satellite, but there's only one satellite we
Only
can
one.
get.
Yep.
We've talked about maybe having 2 satellites, but they always in the Renaissance zone seem to hang on to 1 or 2 blocks, so you could add another block in the zone.
And this is a state program. Is there anything changing at the legislature this year with Renaissance zones?
No, we're working on trying to get a neighborhood zone bill through. That one has it's been amended to not be anywhere to be a property or an income tax cut. So we'll see what the Senate does. We won't know until the end of April if any program survives. So the other thing that you can do is you can amend your plan. So let's say the Oak Grove project finishes in 2 years. We could take that block and put it somewhere else. So when a block is completely done, you can move them around. I call this one our brownfield redevelopment policy. This is when we have TIF requests that really deal more with trying to develop a site that has some challenges. So, for instance, the Oak Grove housing project had older buildings, utility issues. But this particular site, Butler Business Park, was a series of buildings, kind of 1950s vintage that needed to be replaced, and a largely underdeveloped site. The level of assistance is typically limited to the cost to buy the land, really the cost to turn that site from being a difficult to develop site to more of a clean, greenfield type development. So that's what we did with this Butler Business Park. They're generally limited to 15 years. Again, the Oak Grove project, the housing project that's pending and not included. And then the other pending application is the Kmart site as well as Drucker Brewery, which we'll talk about later. This last group I put into more of a public-private partnership, TIF districts, where we're using TIF money to pay for some public benefit. And this would be the Riverfront redevelopment plan, if we adopt that in a week, would be in this category. But in this case, the businesses generally are paying the property taxes to the city. Rather than getting an exemption, they actually get a property tax bill. It's paid to the city. And these cases like Roberts and Mercantile, we're not giving it back to the developer. We're using it to pay for the bonds, for the parking facilities. In the horse park, we were paying for infrastructure up to that area. The Great Northern Depot was also infrastructure into that site. We got $62 million in increment annual property taxes of $868,000 that then go to these activities. So this is a summary of all these. Again, I kind of view these is 8 different policies aimed at 8 different goals and objectives, whether it be low-income housing, the total value of what's exempted right now. In these last year's numbers, you'll see some new numbers for next year in a few weeks. It's $455 million. The total citywide taxable value is $14 billion. And so you see it's about all these property tax exemptions amount to 3.2% of our taxable property values. They're being exempted under these programs. When you look at it by kind of the types of organizations that receive the benefits, you have renters that receive some with those incentives for low-income housing, general property owners receiving the benefit with the single-family housing and most of the remodeling exemptions. Businesses are receiving, and developers are receiving those. They include economic development, the NDSU housing, downtown housing, and the brownfield. And then those public-private partnerships, there's some city benefit in those where we're often getting some sort of city facility. So this is another little pie chart that shows how those all break out. Let's see. By percentage of the overall, property tax base, this pie chart probably shows it best that a little over half of it goes to businesses, and the other portion to city property owners and renters. I wanted to go over some of the tax increment financing districts. Showing the mayor a chart I put together. We've had right now we have 13 TIF districts in place. These are ones that have closed out. 12, 13 years ago, we also had 13. We've had 11 close and 11 start in the last dozen years. So they vary in range. The average here is 14.7 years of the ones that have closed. The outlier here is the Dakota Bank. I should give you a little bit of background on that one. It was approved in 1981. It was to encourage the redevelopment of the Dakota building at 51 Broadway and the Wells Fargo building. I don't know the details of how that money was used, but it helped, I think, clear the site and provide a site for both of those buildings to be built. So that district was designed to go for about 20 years. Got to about 1999, all the debt had been paid off, and the city was looking at a way to pay for that Island Park parking ramp. In 1999, the decision was made, well, let's keep the TIF district in place and use it to help pay for a portion of the Island Park parking ramp. So that TIF was then extended. The parking ramp activity was added. That parking ramp was financed really 3 different sources. One was the TIF revenue. Secondly, it was the people that rented parking spots there. Parking was needed at both Bank of the West building and Wells Fargo. And then the banks each paid a special assessment each year to cover a deficiency that wasn't, so there was a limited amount of TIF money that went in each year. What we earned from the renters, and then any shortfall was covered and special assessed to the bank. So it was kind of a 3-way financing. So, but most of the others, finished according to plan. We have again 13, I think, active TIF districts here. Again, most of them are on schedule or just starting. Probably the two outliers are ones that have gone a longer period of time. One was the Great Northern Depot that was provided. We put in utilities. However, then the restaurant was struggling, and they were given a pilot. So then we didn't have the TIF revenue, so that ended up causing it to be extended. The restaurant closed. It was converted to a bike shop. They were given a Renaissance Zone exemption. So, trying to keep these exemptions, coordinated from the start. That one has gone on for many years. The actual bonds have been paid off, and there's some debt that the city has internally. I think in a couple more years it can be we will have fully paid off or recovered the $330,000 of loan that the city had taken out on that one. The second one was the horse park. That was started in 2002. We anticipated a lot of development that would happen to help pay for those property tax or pay for that infrastructure. We did, on this case, we had kind of planned ahead. The safety was that there was a special assessment district that was created so that the TIF revenue didn't come in, it would be covered. The development did not start for 10 years, and so the developer ended up having to pay special assessments. Really didn't receive any benefit from the TIF on the private property. The horse park has paid some special assessments. But the good news now is there's sufficient revenue, we'll probably have about $180,000 a year, so that this past year and in future years, there will be money to pay for those special assessments in the horse park. We'll finally start to see what was expected. I think the lesson learned here is, and think about it as we do this riverfront TIF, is you don't spend too much money up front until you know the development's coming along. We've been more cautious on both Mercantile and Roberts. We knew the development was going to happen, it came in right afterwards, and so those were working fine. So it's really important to sync the development with the any money that you spend in TIF revenue. So maybe just kind of go back, and I want to get your thoughts on each of these 8 categories. If you have some thoughts on what you would change, do you like the way it's working? Are you satisfied with these particular policies?
Mr. Chair? Jim, could you talk a little bit, because I think that a lot of us really support the low-income housing, especially senior housing and especially downtown. Can you talk about the challenges? Part of it is we're limited by the state, and can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think all of us are in favor of that, but we would like to know how can we make that more effective?
The state has a federal program, has low-income housing tax credits, and there's typically enough money to do 4 or 5 projects a year statewide. In addition, the state has a housing incentive fund. I have not heard how that's faring in the legislature, but those are 2 state programs. Also, we receive some money from HUD to do housing projects. This is, I thought, is just how to coordinate this maybe a little better internally, is that perhaps these projects should be reviewed by the Community Development Committee instead of the Tax Exempt Review Committee to match up the HUD money with this, because generally they've needed both HUD money reviewed through the Community Development Committee and these property tax exemptions reviewed through Tax Exempt. It's not always the case, but we want to make sure that's synced up. But it's really challenging, and there's a big need for senior housing. I think there's over 1,000 people waiting on the waiting list at the Fargo Housing Authority.
Commissioner Strand, would you think that a good idea if there's HUD money to go there first, then go to the Tax Review Committee?
Mayor and Commissioner Pepcorn and Jim, I think that's sensible. My estimation of the community development now is housing is becoming more of our focus, affordable, accessible housing, and that would be a good fit. We're trying to really hone in on that, especially with the tsunami of seniors coming down the road that are retirement age and above, that where are they gonna live? And how's that affect? But yes, I think that's a good fit.
So, Mr. Chair, I do think however it can be most complementary, we have to change, because what's happening is people want to live close to healthcare, and we're a healthcare hub. And so we already have a shortage, and it's only going to grow. So I think we have to do a better job of telling the state, but I think we also have to pursue looking at ourselves, what can we do without anybody else? Because I think relying on them, that's just kind of an easy out. I think we have to start saying, this is a priority for our city, and what can we do as a city? Thank you.
Commissioner Preston?
As I'm looking at all of these, I truly can't give much feedback on any of them, but what I see is missing is, how do we know that we're making any kind of advancement on any of these? it would be good, I would think, even with low-income housing, to have a better idea of where we're at as a community and where we need to go. Where's that gap? How much do we need to do in regards to incentives to fill that gap? And what other things do we need to look at to fill that gap? So, in each one of these, it's not very clear to me. And whenever we have a project coming forward, Jim, I asked for this, where is our comprehensive housing strategy? Where is our comprehensive housing plan? We don't necessarily have a broad-based one, which if you look at economic development, workforce housing is definitely part of that. I don't see anything here about workforce housing. So I would say that we need some metrics of some sorts, probably with each one of these. How do we know we're getting there?
Right. You're right, that our last comprehensive housing study was in 2015, and certainly a lot has changed since then. I've been visiting with, Nicole in the planning department about trying to redo that study. I know they have one in the works for looking more at low-income housing downtown, but, that's certainly just a segment of that. But I agree that's needed, and if we can try to get that into the 2022 budget to take that broader comprehensive look in conjunction with the Housing Authority. I know, Commissioner Strand, you're liaison to the Housing Authority, but I think that would be helpful because you're right. With low-income housing, we know there's this big need, but we don't know how deep that
Yeah.
need is.
So we don't know if we're making any headway on it. The second thing is, and this came up with the core neighborhood plan, some of these incentives are fighting each other. And we're trying to counterbalance one incentive with another. So is there a better way of doing this, would be my question. Like with the core neighborhood.
That may beg a question, Commission, just like Commissioner Pickford was just talking as well. Maybe we need a consultant to look at which ones are working, or do we need more compared nationally? Are we doing it right, or are there ways we could improve it? And to your point, you look at the housing, what do we need? Do we need more affordable housing for all the construction people coming to the town? What do we need now? And then what's working? Because when I see a return of 9 million to 390 million, that looks like it's working. We're getting tremendous growth and value out of it. But what do you want to stimulate? And I think Commissioner Preston, you've talked about, are we pushing incentives to go greenfields, or should we push incentives to build in North Fargo? So where do we want to put our incentives to get the best maximum benefit to the community? And I think in your neighborhood study, it mentioned, I don't know how many homes should really be rehabbed at $35,000 apiece, and how we're going to get that to happen. So maybe it is a time to say, are our economic incentives working, or is there a better way to do it? Is there somebody who has that breadth of knowledge to help us out? So just something to put in the back to think about, maybe in community development, John, to come out of that, or somebody's committee or planning or whatever. Let's figure out what works.
If I could say one more thing there. It seems to me like we need to look at this as somewhat of a finite pot, a budget of sorts, and how are we prioritizing those dollars? Are they getting us where we need to go? And that's what I think is missing.
The next one has to do with this remodeling exemption. This is to encourage people to invest in their homes. Sometimes you ask the question, will they do it anyway? We don't really, know. Certainly, I think it's an incentive. How much of it makes an impact on people's decision, but certainly it rewards people that have invested in their housing rather than immediately increasing the property taxes. And I know it's encouraged some of the commercial businesses to expand.
So, Mr. Chair, I do think we are not telling this story well enough. Especially, there's a lot of older homes that, just from the energy savings, a 5-year for a 40-year-old house, that you can get a lot of improvements as far as insulation, heating systems, and I'm not sure that we're getting that out there, because like the Renaissance Zone, most people are familiar. Hey, that's a good deal. It's very popular, very successful, but I'm not sure that maybe there's some way we should be targeting, especially now we know there's some of these difficult neighborhoods where we're concerned about their future. Maybe we should be actively going out and promoting, saying, hey, do you know we have this program available for your house? And so I do think that's something that we as a city can do a better job of. Just from my perspective, I think we should be out actively in the neighborhoods telling them, because I think there's people that would take advantage of it if they knew it. Thank you.
Question of the commissioners, time value money. Is there any reason we shouldn't just do 5 years for everything? Because you have this 3-year, 5-year, but a 25-year or 40-year-old home, when you look at, today we talk about if you redo a furnace, how much that costs, how much things cost, and our taxes are low in many ways, but would there be more incentive if you just did everything 5 years? And that, I think, Jim, that is something we can do?
Yeah, that's something that the city could change the policy. I know the Ben Hushk had made that suggestion to me about a year ago, that when we update it, we should, in addition to Dave Pepcorn's comment, really promote this in advance. I think inspections and assessors does a good job in telling people about it. Kind of a lot of that's after the fact, after they've already made the decision, or trying to decide what to do.
Can I just, Mr. Chair, can I add one more thing? So that we've got, you all got the copy of the Tax Exempt Review Committee policy and guidelines. So here's my open invitation. We would love to have improvements from anybody, including all the commissioners and any of the public. If there are ways that they think we can make this a better policy, please forward them on to us, and we will review them. If you want to come, everyone's welcome to our meetings. But I do think this is an open opportunity, and I think we all want to see it improve. And if there's specific things that we can improve, I'd love to hear it. And then can I just tell you one funny story? So if you can flip it to the horse park, so that's been that's been going on for a long time. So I volunteered foolishly to be a part of the North Dakota Racing Commission, and so I served for 5 years. And my first meeting, they made nothing but fun of me about how my feet would drag if I got on a horse. And so, but I learned a lot of good things, and now we've reformed that. And so now they're at least current with their property taxes. And for a while there, we were very concerned. And I just want to thank Jim and Kent Costin, and the staff did a lot of work about trying to help that, because it was, Mayor, you can speak from perspective, it was a mess and shaky at best. And so now I have a cowboy hat, I got cowboy boots, I go to the races, and all the cowboys know me, and they don't make as much fun of me as they used to. So that's the end of my story. Thank you. Actually,
it was very good that Commissioner Pepcorn did solve that problem, because it was going nowhere fast, and now they're finally going to pay it off. So I'm very excited then. It makes people, hey, go out there and watch the races, but get out there. Commissioner Strand?
Thank you, Mayor. Jim, this is really great information. I don't know how much we can get done today, but it's a start. In my head, we have two ends of this spectrum. One of them is the balcony and policy, and the other one is the weeds, the detail of what we're doing. And I don't know how much they balance each other or connect to each other, and it's hard to separate, in my mind, which it is that I'm focusing on. So for the moment, I'm just going to talk balcony for the moment, just overall goals. And I think we could probably agree to some of these goals as far as then fitting our policies underneath them. One of them is affordable housing, ownership and rentals, especially, as Commissioner Preston mentioned, the workforce development aspect of this, especially now with the diversion unfolding. We have a really major housing challenge on both fronts, renting and ownership. Another one is strengthening our core neighborhoods. Which policies fit into the general gist of strengthening in core neighborhoods and connect to the core neighborhood strategic plan, which is just unfolded. Another category in the balcony is job creation, prime sector job creation. Going down into the weeds there, I'll say yes, but not at $13 an hour. If they're not getting a living wage, the balcony view is, yes, we support job creation. The weeds says, no, I won't support anything at less than $15 an hour or a living wage, somewhere where we find a balance to these. Lastly, even though it's kind of implied, I have a personal predisposition to say anything we can do to enhance and support home ownership. So the legislature's been talking about stepping up the incentives for new homes to $250,000 and policies like that. But in my mind, We've done a very good job in Fargo in the University Mixed Use District or downtown incenting and encouraging apartments, but I don't know that we've done an adequate job, maybe we have, incenting homeownership. So that's kind of where I'm looking at things, getting up into the balcony and seeing our overriding goals, and then going down into the weeds and seeing how they interact with each other.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Commissioner
could just
Preston?
add to that, I agree fully. And as you're talking there, John, I'm thinking, what we have here are tools to achieve certain goals. And how are those tools being used to achieve those goals? So I'm still wondering how the discussion would move forward on trying to identify what those overall citywide, community-wide, and I'm having trouble articulating this because we're talking about just coming up to a slightly higher level. You've got goals and objectives listed here, but then how does that relate to what we're trying to accomplish in the community, or where are the gaps in the community, and how does this relate to that? How do we get that conversation going, and how do we get those metrics in place, would be my question.
Yep.
I think with your, for instance, the core neighborhood plan that, that includes a lot of ideas. Some of these tax exemptions would complement that, but this isn't all, this won't solve all those problems. And so, it's how we spend the money and in the budget too. Years ago, we used to have money in the neighborhood revitalization initiative where we could take on redevelopment of homes. We had some HUD money for a while, or some neighborhood stabilization money, and that's all been dried up and spent. And so programs that once operated, I think, fairly effectively simply haven't had funding in years. And so with the core neighborhood plan, I think they're suggesting we go back to some of those same strategies. But so yes, neighborhood redevelopment needs to go beyond just what we do with tax exemptions. It needs to go where we invest our infrastructure money. It needs to invest money in housing.
Just a question, Arlette. Does that mean community development starts working on this, John's committee, or does that mean planning starts working on this? Where would you put that?
Yeah, probably, as I read the mission of the Community Development Committee, it would be a logical place for it, yeah.
Okay. With some guidance, I would assume, from planning as well. Commissioner
Yeah,
Peppercorn?
yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, the other thing you have to do is learn from the past. And the one thing we've learned is, when you had these closed tax TIFs, or, a couple of them ran for 40 years and 23 years, the one thing we've learned is don't ever do that again. And I think if you look now, we have much more discipline that we at least have a plan for them to close, because I think that's the one thing we've learned. And this is a very powerful tool. We don't have very many economic development tools at our disposal as a city commission. This is a very powerful tool, and so we have to make sure that we handle it with great care. I do think we're doing better, and I think there's room for improvement. That's the way. But to learn from our past mistakes, but when the mayor talks about the return on investment, when you look at some of those places that were flat parking lots and now are multi-million-dollar buildings, those will pay property taxes forever, and that's a great thing. And so I do think we have to be very careful, and if we don't handle them well, then we'll lose them. That's the other thing. So I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn, and there's a lot of ways we can make it improve. Thank you.
So if we have any more on the new housing, but this is one, it appears the legislature is going to keep that at 150, so.
Can we, if we wanted to in Fargo, increase that to another number?
No,
It's a statutorily
it's
driven.
a cap, 2-year cap and 150 cap. You can go lower, you can't go longer.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I might, and Jim, I have a couple questions I'd like to just get into the conversation. One of them is, when somebody gets awarded an exemption or a tax break, and they present to us, the committee, and to the commission, criteria that qualifies them, Like, for example, this many new jobs at such and such a wage level. Something that is occurring to me is, I don't know that there's an audit provision later on to confirm they actually did what they said they would do. And I think we need to really look at that clearly, you know, to confirm that the information was accurate and that they did what they said they'd do. I just think that's a basic. We've got the but-for test now, but subsequent to awarding tax breaks, I think there's need and occasions where we need to reaffirm they actually did create this many new jobs at this level of wages, and/or what are the consequences. I think that's a concern I have that I'll just lay out there.
Commissioner Pipcorn.
So, Mr. Chair, that's a great point. And actually, so Jim's position is a new position. Having an economic liaison is what I would, call that. But we work with the EDC, and the EDC, they verify many of these things. I don't want to put Joe Rosso on the spot, but you have to fill out and you have to fulfill those obligations, these are documents that are mandated. And so we work together. But I do agree, you have to make sure that we are following up, that they are doing what they're promising. If we're delivering on our end, that they are delivering on their end.
And I'll continue, Commissioner Pepcorn. We had an award within the recent few years where, subsequent to us giving the award based on the information we're giving, the employees reached out to us and said, none of us are getting those wages. So that kind of puts us in a pickle. What do we do if we're being told informationally their wages are at such and such levels, and then the people tell us, no, that's not what we're getting?
Well,
I don't know the answer to that.
They are required to sign a business incentive agreement and provide, some reporting for us. We haven't been the best at following up on that. Certainly the assessor knows whether they're still at that location or not, but I've been visiting with Mr. Reso about having them kind of do that follow-up, because they're out there doing business retention, expansion visits anyway, and so it'd be fairly easy for them to, I think, check in on a few of these.
Yeah, with the with the current approach, we're to Commissioner Pepcorn's comment, we as an organization are not being asked to track for any legal purposes. I think clawbacks would be the term that Commissioner Strand's referring to. This is done throughout the country with agreements between public bodies and private companies. So it wouldn't be something new or unexpected. I think the ultimate challenge is having the ability as an organization, whether it's charged to a group like ours or it's within the city's purview, to keep track of those and reach out and say, okay, we're in year 3. Where are we at with employment? Where are we at with wages and jobs? Are they being met? And if they're not, what's the agreement that we all agreed to ahead of time to rectify that? Maybe it's an extending another year because of a pandemic, right? I mean, there's ways to track these types of things. And one other comment I do want to make, because I think it's been talked about more in the last half an hour, is kind of what structurally are the main buckets where you're wanting to invest, incentives, what's the goals within those areas, and how do they all play with one another and align? And in my experience over the years, even though it's been primarily focused on primary sector development, there are usually 5 major areas where cities get into these kind of discussions. And I don't need to go into those details right here because I think you're probably almost up against your time, but would be happy to talk, actually have them all written down right here and share them with the staff, with all of you, but also want you to know that we've been working closely with Jim to update the the primary sector policies and adding some things to those that I think put a little bit more focus and understanding of what the company's expectations are.
Joe, could you leave a copy of that with Kimber, and she'll make
Yeah,
copies
absolutely.
for everybody? And I think what John's asking is maybe we need to talk about clawbacks if people aren't complying. But I think the other thing, Commissioner Pipcorn, is sometimes a report 3 years from hence to how they're doing. And I think that's just like server compliance. We get 13, 14 companies that are on this list, and we found everybody's compliant except this company, and they bring a report to the commission. And I think and then we'd be an opportunity, John, to do a clawback. So
Another topic, and I know the clock's running here, but we've all seen in the last few years since I've been on the commission, moments in time where we have established policies, we advertise to the public what we offer, Then it gets through the whole routine and gets to the city commission, we're debating, and somebody's out there in the audience wondering, am I going to get approved for what I think I'm qualifying for? I'd like to depoliticize this process somehow, so that it doesn't in the end get kiboshed with one commissioner who says, I'm just anti-everything, or another one who says, I just don't like this particular company, and that can't happen. So somehow in our overriding arching goals, if we can come up with an approach that's consistent, fair, and depoliticizes things, I'd really like to see how we could accomplish that too.
I think that's what you're trying to do today. Yeah. Jim?
Then we got some of the economic development, and again, where we typically stay with that 5 years, and unless we go longer, and it has more to do with the job creation. And we do, have those clawbacks, so we can take it back if they don't perform. That is an ability that the city would have. You'd have to have a hearing in order to do that. But I know EDC continues to work with these companies as they expand. The NDSU area housing one, this is one where I think it's that core neighborhood plan it's going to be helpful, because that plan identified areas where it was appropriate for multifamily development and areas where it was not. And I think in almost every case, we're still within the areas where it was appropriate for multifamily development. I think there's still a need, there's still houses in this area that were identified for more multifamily that are in poor condition, and it would be nice to, see that redevelopment happen. On the student side, though, what we've seen also is with declining enrollment and the number of houses that are built up there today, if you drive through that neighborhood, there's almost every building has a for rent sign. And so the demand for more housing, at least, at this moment in time, is much lower than it was. And so that will probably be a factor in any future applications that come in, at least if it's student-oriented housing, because it does. I think the recent vacancy rate in Fargo is 6%, but on North Fargo, it's closer to 10%. So that's a market change that has happened. So,
If I could just add something to that. I think this whole area of NDSU area housing and redevelopment is probably kind of a microcosm of what I'm talking about, is that the environment has changed. We probably would be better to see an NDSU long-range plan of some sorts to kind of get a handle on what is the need for student housing and how does that impact the application of our incentives on that. Fully agree with that.
Commissioner Strand?
Mayor, you made a mention of us going to another level of studying what we do, whether we have a consultant or however. I appreciate that. I think it's needed. I don't know the best approach to do that and what others have done, but I think it would be really great for us to get to a look of this bigger package of picture and all the different incremental elements of it and see what we can do. I think that would help us, frankly. It'd be a really high priority.
Well, to you and our last comment is, if we're going to incentivize home buying or homeowners, so you're going to take these apartments in North Fargo and break them back down and make them a single-family home. They're huge sometimes, but what would it incentivize somebody to do that? And we have some COVID money. Maybe we put some money into the neighborhoods. We don't wait for federal money, like Pepcorn said. Maybe we do something as a city to try and experiment. Well, why don't we ask somebody, hey, what worked?
and this just shows those projects. Then we have, downtown redevelopment. I think right now, more recently, the demand has been for housing, and that along the riverfront too. When we look at our downtown plan, one of those recommendations was to try to get more people to live downtown. Even before that plan was adopted, and look at the number of new housing units downtown. I think over the last 6-7 years, we've had 1,100 new apartments, downtown apartments or condos. And so we're seeing, development in that area. When I've talked to the owners of these buildings, it seems like within a year, they're 95% full. And so I don't know how deep that market is, but at least for right now, it seems like there continues to be a demand for people to live downtown. And it certainly helps the other businesses downtown. Our community's continuing to grow, so having more apartments downtown seems to fit. But again, we haven't done that study to try to figure out, well, what's the depth of that number.
Commissioner Tran?
Jim, I'm just curious, as we go forward also, we might pay particular attention to new surfacing issues. For example, post-pandemic, we may have some big box stores that get into trouble. We might have some commercial entities getting into trouble. And some of them may in the past have qualified for tax breaks or incentives. Somehow we need to figure out how to get through this troubling, challenging time with the commercial and big box stores, and maybe some others post-pandemic that are going to be challenged in their economic formula going forward. And however all those fit into tax policies or tax breaks or targeted incentives, I don't know. But I'd sure hate to have us have a floodgate open of people asking for abatements later on. And some of them maybe have qualified in the past for tax breaks, some haven't. And how can we help them survive? I think we have some questions coming our way that will impact policies for tax breaks as well.
A lot of people nationally are speculating what's going to happen to the office market, and that's true in Fargo too. There's a lot of vacant office space in the downtown, and will companies have more of their employees work at home? Will companies want more space so they can spread out? Those are all unanswered at this point, but we'll need to watch that market. Probably now wouldn't be the time to put up a huge speculative office building in the downtown or anywhere. Our downtown, we've certainly seen over the last 20 years a lot of redevelopment, and that's just so again, there's a lot of surface parking lots downtown. Certainly a lot of potential to continue to see those turned into housing, other commercial businesses. And then brownfield redevelopment, you mentioned a big box, the former Kmart site. It's a building that there's not that many big box stores anymore. We've seen Gander Mountain close and be turned into a manufacturing plant, and so some of these older commercial strips maybe, if we want to see them redevelop, we may need to provide some incentives. Sort of when you look at urban land economics, you sort of have a growth as areas grow, and then it starts to decline, and it kind of gets to this zone of uncertainty where is it going to go down and kind of hit rock bottom, or do you try to intervene and try to get some redevelopment? And these public-private partnerships, the one that will be on your agenda in a week from now would be this downtown riverfront plan, where we lays out a plan for trying to make some property available for the redevelopment that the city has, looks at incentives, looks at improvements such as helping tear down the Mid-America Steel site to try to make that more attractive for development, make sure we have adequate infrastructure. And so these are things that sometimes the city may initiate, and sometimes the private sector may come to us and say, let's do a public-private partnership that's going to redevelop an area. And I think as I've kind of looked at how you've dealt with TIF requests recently, obviously the ones that deal with more brownfields have been like Kmart and Oak Grove has succeeded in having you take a look at it, and others that are dealing more with sites that don't have those challenges, you've declined to participate. And so looking for any thought on that, on how you'd like that to be included in our policy.
Jim, I think we'll wrap it up at 1:08, and I know the commissioners are terribly busy. I think we all have the message that we can talk to you and do some different things. I think Commissioner Pepcorn, you're thinking of changing your name from tax exempt committee to something else, aren't you? You're coming up with some new names or something?
Actually, it's not just me. I think as a city, we might have to give out a prize or something like that for a more positive message for the committee. And so I think Kent brought it up at one of the other meetings. So if anybody comes up with a new idea, we'd love to hear it. But at the same time, there's a lot of things we can improve on this too, and so to make it a better policy and things like that. So
You don't want to take EDC's name, economic development. You want to try and come up with something else.
We will
Okay.
not appropriate Joe Rosso's name.
Thank you, everybody, for the meeting. Jim, excellent job in the presentation. I think, commissioners, you have a better understanding of a lot of things, and/or there's a lot of stuff to cover today. But I think we also have some new directions as well, and I think staff is going to be scrambling just to come up with the different things we've talked about here today. And I think, Jim, what we'd kind of like is, after talking to the commissioners, maybe that policy thing we have in it, can we rewrite it and then bring it back to the commission?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is work with the Tax Exempt Review Committee and rewrite it again, more along those, called 8 different chapters in the different policies, because right now it's a little hard to follow. When we merged all the policies before, we just kind of, pushed them next to each other and didn't necessarily lay it out by what we were trying to accomplish. But Commissioner Preston said with, some of our overall housing policy or neighborhood development policy, this isn't a complete policy of the city. This simply is how we deal with applications for property tax exemptions.
But I think Commissioner Strand had wanted, if you follow policy, there's a good possibility the commission will give you that exemption if you follow the policies that we've laid out. And as Commissioner Preston says, if we're stimulating or trying to have certain things happen, we will support that. And you can expect that as a developer, if you walk in and you're doing some of the goals the city wants, we would be more supportive of it. So thank you very much. Any other closing comments? John, you're not going to have a final one?
Well, Mayor, I have 2 issues in my mind still. One of them is our most, in my mind, our most at-risk neighborhood might be the Roosevelt neighborhood. So if we can kind of keep that in our minds, because that will be other neighborhoods down the road, but right now it's Roosevelt. I think we have a grand opportunity to help people get into home ownership there in these small little homes that were turned into rentals that are sitting empty. And then that'll connect the dots to our workforce development with the diversion. And that's my second point. We desperately need information. What are our needs for housing right now with the diversion coming? We need some information. We need some data. We need to be proactive on that and not just reactive.
Thank you.